time, really around the clock, to help people out during these storms.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk with the Austin Fire Department, and Bob Nix, he is joining us live to talk a little bit about what his firefighters are seeing out there. And I know you have incredible stories of how your firefighters and you, Bob, are going above and beyond the call of duty. I want to talk about that in a bit. But first, tell me, AFD has responded to dozens of broken pipe calls. I'm wondering first, why AFD responds to that?
That's a call type we've responded to for 50 years. You know, basically when someone's not getting shot at, you need help, you call firefighters and they'll show up and help you. So especially now, it's actually critical because we got to get these pipes, we need to get them repaired, and so the system can operate at full capacity. So it's actually a very important actually safety feature, where it's normally a non-emergency type call.
Some of those pipes have been around for 50 years since you've been taking those calls, Bob. What do you do when firefighters get there to a pipe that is broken to help out? What's the first thing you do?
We have to figure out where the valves are to shut the water down so the system can maintain pressure, especially when you have broken pipes all over the city. You know, nobody ever anticipated temperatures this low in Austin. Maybe we should have, but they hadn't. And the pipes are just they're not designed. They're not put deep enough to withstand these types of temperatures.
We're hearing reports of people doing everything they can to stay warm, lighting charcoal inside their own homes, using sort of those camping propane stoves. Are you getting a lot of reports of fires that are connected to these alternative methods of staying warm?
Yes, we've had a lot of fires since Saturday, way more than normal, and a lot of it is alternate heat sources, but then also the system designs of the regular heating systems are not meant to stay on 24 hours. So if it's any flaw in the system at all, that can cause problems too. So we're having electrical problems, furnace fires, alternate heat source fires, you know, the whole gambit.
I know that you're concerned about a lot of things, but what are you hearing from your firefighters on the ground about what is the most pressing issue right now that they're dealing with?
You know, there's been firefighters that came in Saturday that are still working. They either mostly they need the personnel, but also they can't get away from the stations in some cases because the roads are too icy. So we've had firefighters on the job over 96 hours now working. So the stress of that with all the different calls, they're making a ton of calls, is high. Of course, that's what we trained for, and that's what we're here for. So we're happy to do it. But you know, when this is all over, the toll will be taken. You know, we need to recover.
And then when you have firefighters who are able to make it home, they're not staying home. They're helping out other people. Tell me what you're doing.
Well, yesterday I realized that the neighborhood behind our Union Hall, Cornell Hills, had been without power for 30 hours. And so we opened up our Union Hall, and us, along with collective campaigns, United professional organizers, are basically set up a shelter there that would accommodate about 40 beds. We got with Natasha Madison, Council District 1 council member. She was able to get us the cots. Then what I realized talking to her is there's a lot of people, like I'm a big believer in government, but when things get this bad, it's always neighbors helping neighbors. And so she said on a granular level, they're having a hard time moving people around to these shelters or getting food to them. So I put out a call to firefighters kind of late last night around 4 or 5 o'clock. I got about 20 people with 20 firefighters, male and female firefighters with 4x4 trucks. And I've been sending that information to Natasha's office, and they are basically dispatching these firefighters around the city to get people to various shelters or to get food to them.
Oh, you are amazing. Firefighters, thank you so much for everything that you do. Before we let you go, and I hate to let you go, but what can we do to help you and your firefighters out there?
You know, I'm going to give some advice that it's kind of counter to what some people have said. I've heard some officials say, stay at home, even if you've lost power. And I would say what you need to do is you need to find a friend that has heat, and then find somebody with a truck that can get you there. And if you can't, call the firefighters. We'll help you. I mean, I'll give you my personal cell number, 512-217-3474. You give me a call, we'll try to get a truck there to get you to a warm shelter.
Well, Bob, why are you saying that? Are you thinking that this could turn into a deadly situation if you stay home?
Nobody really knows what's going to happen with the power, but there's rumors it might be more power is going to leave Austin. And so I'm preparing for the worst. It really doesn't get above freezing until Saturday. I think that's what the weather says for any length of time. So we're in a serious time. I mean, we have elderly people that are without power and some without food. I had a firefighter from San Antonio had me check on somebody on Westlake Drive, and we have a firefighter going out there this morning to bring food and other supplies. They're in a terrible area as far as the roads, and they're really in a situation they can't take care of themselves. So if you need help, get a hold of us on Facebook or call my cell number, 512-217-3474, and we will try to get help to you. Another thing is call your council member districts.
So again, I hate to play the video, but it kind of captures the moment in time. And so you can kind of see what's happening. The storm is settling in and staying longer. We're starting to lose power throughout the city. And I don't even have a really good idea, even during these statements, of exactly what's going to happen next. But when I put my cell phone number out there, and by the way, I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. I ended up getting 400 calls in 2 days. And we actually made about 100 legitimate saves through volunteer efforts, though. We had, I left my house. It took me 2.5 hours to drive in, the 2 hour, the 1 hour, 50 miles to the office. When I got to the office, well, I put out a message to the members for more volunteers. And as soon as I got in my car, I started getting calls. I probably had 30, 40 calls before I finished my trip. I had people, the first call I had was a lady and a man that were in their mid 70s, no food or water, heat for 2 days. And they had water pipes broken and kind of raining down into their small apartment. So these are life and death situations. And all these folks that called me had tried to access the 911 system and could not. They could not get through. And so I started basically having people text me with the information about where they were and where they wanted to be taken to. At the same time, firefighters were calling me, and I was dispatching them while I was going down the road by forwarding the text. When I got to work, my work was without power. My email system was down, so I had to run it all on a text system. And so I basically got a whiteboard out and put down phone numbers up on the system. I was paging through hundreds of texts trying to find the most highest priority people to dispatch. And we had a tremendous amount of support from the firefighters off duty with 4-wheel drive trucks. We had some civilians calling us. And like I said, we probably made 100 legitimate saves in 2 days. And we're going to talk more about that later. But I thought this was a good video to begin with because it kind of gives you the gravity of the situation. Again, it wasn't just about the cold, it was about the loss of power. And whereas in Canada or even in Michigan, a lot of people may have fireplaces and stuff like that, that's just not something we have here. And it affected a lot of different population types that we'll talk about later in the presentation. But generally, this presentation is going to review fire department emergency operations, and then these informal volunteer organizations that work very well together. We ended up not only making these kind of impromptu saves off duty, but we also opened a whelming shelter. And then we had about 250 apartment complexes that their water pipes were shattered from the storm. So they lost water. So we, with another group called Austin Needs Water, delivered about 400,000 gallons across the city over about a 30-day period. We had a variety of ways of doing that we'll talk about too. So it was a very significant event for us, and I appreciate y'all's interest in it. So anybody that emails me, and my email address will be at the end of this presentation, I'll send a copy of this report that the association did. The fire department, for whatever reason, didn't put out a really good AAR. It was mostly like a picture book of a bunch of activities. We felt like this information should be captured. And I think the unique thing about our association is, one out of the 9 board members, 4 of us, including myself, are battalion chiefs. And so we kind of have a pretty good understanding of how it's supposed to work up and down the chain. And this was all done by member surveys. So you really get an idea from the boots on the ground of what needed to be done. And I think there could even be some lessons learned for other areas in here. So if you'd like this report, I'd be happy to send it to you. So this report was broken into 4 main areas. We're going to go over the top 3, what happened, what worked well, and how can we improve. And the lessons learned, if you get the report, are detailed very well. Basically, they're just pragmatic solutions for the things that we can improve upon. So these questions, like I said, were put out in a membership survey. And so the report is really a great snapshot of what the boots on the ground felt about the activities. And we tried to stay very objective, and I think we did. I think it actually, there were some management, folks from AFD management, Austin Fire Department management, that were very appreciative. Some felt like they were being criticized, but I think you need to look at this with your eyes wide open and put egos aside and make sure that we do better next time where we need to. These major events where your entire dispatch system overrun are never going to be perfect. They're suboptimal, so we need to do what we can to rise to the occasion for next time, learn what we can. So basically, we had some warning of a storm coming in, but they were only talking about temperatures in the low 20s, which we've experienced before. So I don't think a lot of people took it very seriously to begin with. Basically, we were impacted by the weather part of the storm just from the 11th to the 21st, so not a tremendous amount of time. But during that time, just so everybody understands, there were 40 deaths in the Central Texas area related to the cold, either people freezing in their homes or poisoned from CO poisoning or died in a house fire. So it's a big uptick in tragedy that happened during this time. So we went about 141 hours continuous sub-zero temperatures, and without any way to heat. And especially, I don't know if you heard it, if you really realize this in the video, but what happened, well, actually it wasn't in the video, I'm sorry, but what happened was early on we had a lot of wrecks, car wrecks. And so all the public officials were saying stay at home. And this is why I gave out my cell phone number. Is it really kind of aggravated me because I knew that was not the thing to do. These folks, because there were hospitals and other important infrastructure areas needed to maintain electricity, those areas had electricity. And so the homes around those areas had electricity. So that's about a quarter of the city was living normally. I mean, they literally had perfect heat. They had water in many cases. They were living just like they would any other day. And about 3/4 of the city were freezing to death. And this advice to stay home, although well-intended, was not a good idea. And it caused people to delay the action of calling somebody that has warmth, getting somebody that has a 4-wheel drive truck and getting them to warmth. And so when I suggested that, that's why we put out our cell phone number is if nobody had those resources, we wanted to make sure we could satisfy that. I was expecting maybe 50 calls over 2 days, and I ended up getting 400. And so it was an incredibly stressful time, but it was very rewarding also. And I think we did some good. But anyway, just kind of go through the presentation. So we experienced, as the storm started hitting, you can kind of see the uptick in the blue line here, blue line representing calls that happened during the storm compared to last year's historic numbers. We had about a 16 times uptick in calls. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And we'll kind of go through that. Some were very necessary and some actually could have been planned a little differently. And it would have alleviated some of the high call volumes. So on the 7th, which is a Sunday before the storm really hit on the following Saturday, we were getting messages of hard freezes in the hill country, which is west of Austin, in the mid-20s ranges. So it didn't seem too severe, and I don't think many people did much to prepare for it because of that, including the fire department. And as we got closer, so then on Thursday, we started getting the cold weather hit, and we had this 26 car accident Our dispatch volumes went up about twice normal. A lot of the increase was from accidents. So there's major messaging from the city PIO office to stay at home and nobody leave their homes. So on Friday, the storm started hitting, and we had an uptick in volume again, and we started calling off-duty personnel to start staffing some of our brush trucks. Our brush trucks are mostly for wildfire, but they have four-wheel capability, four-wheel drive capability, and so we did start, bringing in some extra personnel to staff some of these vehicles. I'm not sure. We have a lot of wildfire risk in our area, so we had saw teams we put out to try to get some of the trees off the road. Austin loves his trees, and so we don't maintain them and cut them back like we should, and so we do experience power outages because of trees falling, things like that when big storms blow through. Saturday, we started realizing this storm was going to be probably worse than anticipated. I myself personally tried to find a generator at that time, even though I still had power, and there was not a generator you could find within a couple 100 miles from the Central Texas area. I ended up finding a natural gas standalone heater that I could kind of plumb into my existing heater, and thank God I did. It gave me a little bit of, with that, I was able to maintain that one room in my house around 43 degrees, while the rest of my house was about 7 degrees. So I was actually lucky that I had that much preparation. Many people didn't even have that. So on Sunday, we're starting to get in the storm now. We actually had to change our dispatching protocols, and we capped our box alarms, which is our full alarm complement to a house fire, basically to about a third of what we normally send. And we had to do this because we were 2 times normal volume of calls, and we were having, our system was already becoming taxed. Another thing that was very negative was we have a separate EMS department for our paramedics, and they decided to not we have a priority system for EMS calls, and so we have a priority 1 through 5. And we don't normally go, the fire department only goes on priority 1 and 2 and some 3s. Well, when EMS decided to stop their lower priority calls, our dispatch system just picked them up and started sending our firefighters. And unfortunately, our management did not change that. So not only were we going on a lot of fires with fewer firefighters, but we were handling a lot of low priority calls that weren't prioritized very well. And they were just coming out in order as received instead of coming out with some sort of priority to them. And this was one of the biggest themes you'll see in the things that went wrong is that sort of problem. We never initiated an area command that I think would have been extremely beneficial, and let our battalion chiefs in their district areas dispatch their firefighters with adding some level of intelligence as terms of priority. That didn't happen. So it was very, very hard on our firefighters to kind of figure out the best they could what were the priority calls and then go on those calls. Okay, on Monday, this is when we started to get really system-wide blackouts throughout Austin. And again, the problem was the entire grid was going down in Texas. Like I said, if you read some of the reports on this, they were within minutes. Some people say within 30 seconds of losing the entire grid. And once you lose the grid, there's a reboot procedure that can take up to a month to get all the power back on. This was something they never anticipated or didn't anticipate well enough with cold weather. And so is well prepared as probably many areas of Canada would be during a winter storm. A complete loss of electrical system probably still would be a pretty big challenge to your area. We use biodiesel that was freezing up in our units, and some of our units becoming stranded based on just the freezing of our diesel. And so on Monday, we're at about 16 times normal call volume. The video I did that you saw earlier was on Tuesday morning. We were still at that call volume, and literally people could not get in. We had people that had fallen and broken their hips. We had people with the house fires that they couldn't even get through to the dispatching system. So we did not do a very good job of changing the way we receive calls. At one point, we tried to open up our backup dispatch system, and the power went out on their backup system also, so we could not expand our system. Everybody that called me had tried to get on to through the 911 system first, and for whatever reason, couldn't get through. So we had a major fire on Brody Lane. There was a lot of people now that are without heat, and so warming shelters are starting to crop up over the city, including at our Union Hall. But there was no way to get that huge volume of people to the warming centers in some cases. It was very challenging. Firefighters could not leave the job at this point. My son, who works at Station 47, had put in well over 96 hours. He was in a very icy area, but he could not leave the station. So he stayed there, and the people that would have relieved him could not get to the station. And this was happening all over the city. I think management should have done this earlier. They didn't even activate the Department Operations Center until Tuesday. And the EOC was not even activated till the day after. So there was this lag time. It seems almost like there was some sort of lack of situational awareness on some of the upper management. And I think that's common in these, I'm not trying to be critical. I think that's common in these sort of real extreme events, but there was a delay in setting up our Department Operations Center and the Emergency Operations Center for the city. Again, staffing on Tuesday was an extreme problem. This was the first day I started receiving those 400 calls. And so while all this was going on, we were dispatching firefighters behind the scenes, basically grabbing people in their homes and taking them to a warming shelter, or taking them to a family member who had heat and food and water in their homes. At this point, there wasn't a lot of broken frozen pipes yet, but there's starting to be. So on Wednesday, dispatching was still 15 times normal. We had a triple fatality fire. It was probably a fire where the victims were also incapacitated by CO poisoning, and so they couldn't self-evacuate. And at this point on Wednesday, we're starting to, Austin Water Utility is starting to identify major problems. They're getting major breaks in major lines. It's created issues where they couldn't ensure the safety of the water supply in large swaths of the city. At some point, almost the entire city was down from water. And as it started thawing out, the water department was able to get the pressure grid up relatively quickly, but we had over 250 apartment complexes around the city where the plumbing was so shattered, it took nearly a month to get all of them back online. So a lot of need for water delivery, well above beyond what the city was doing. The city kind of set up about 10 distribution sites to give out 1 million bottles of water, and they really felt that was adequate. But again, I think there was a little bit of lost situational awareness. We were actually delivering the water, and we knew the need, and we would express that to them and ask for help. And it's like they didn't quite understand, or they didn't believe us. I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a significant water supply problems that started on the 17th of February that continued on for about a month. Thursday, things are starting to get better. People are getting to warming shelters that can. We still are about 5 times above normal levels. And we're still at sub-zero or freezing temperatures. By Friday, so now we're looking at a full week, first day above freezing. EMS went back to their normal dispatching, so that did have a good effect on our call volume. And the City of Austin water's concerns became way better known once the freezing weather ended. Now, we're not talking about we had a 90-degree day, but we were a little above freezing on about a week into this. So now we're switching from saving people in their homes and to all the different things. And we're starting to get power back in a lot of part of the cities too at this point. But water concerns are becoming very, very important. And on the 20th Saturday, as things heat up more, broken water pipe calls become a very primary call for us. We're going around the city taking care of that to the extent we can. So on Sunday, finally, a little bit more than a week after the storm hit, the DOC shuts down, and on February 22nd, AFD is returning to Recon 1, which basically means that we are at normal dispatching again and call volumes. And one station is still remains with no water service, but all the rest of our stations are doing fine at this point. So this shows kind of a timeline of what I just went through to give you some idea. You know, the time the freezing started was here on the 11th. By the 15th is when we started having these bad rolling blackouts across the city, which created you know, citizen transportation issues, trying to get them to warmth. And then as things started warming up a little bit, that's when the broken water calls started really happening. And this became important call types. Like normally those are kind of a non-emergency call for us, where a broken water pipe occurs and we go and try to help the citizen solve it. But these were really important to make sure we could maintain pressure in the system, since we had hundreds of breaks across the city. And so that we spent a good deal of our time towards the latter part of this schedule dealing with that sort of issue. Before I go on, is there any questions? Okay. So what went well? This is kind of a weird picture because we have chains for our tires. We don't put them on very often. And honestly, we've had a lot of new people in the department, and some of them never put them on probably. They probably learn in their apparatus training, but only time. So when we started putting these on and using them for a week solid for, you know, at 16 times your normal call volume, the chains were breaking, falling off. And one of the problems we had was, you know, that among others, but this was just kind of a picture of some of the resourcefulness. And basically it was the firefighters on the ground, is probably usually the case, that had to figure things out to the best they could. And that was one of the things that really did go well. Our surveys, the term above and beyond came out a lot. The firefighters felt overwhelmed. They were very tired. They're very fatigued during this time. They were not getting relieved for way over 100 hours in some cases. But everybody rose to the occasion and did well, and spirits stayed pretty good. Sometimes they didn't feel supported from above, whatever reason. Maybe because management was dealing with the EOC and all the different drivers it takes to run that, but there wasn't a lot of communication between upper management and the folks in the field. And it seemed to be the esprit de corps of the boots on the ground is really what kept things going. I guess my suggestion would be is this is the time you really want to rally the troops and give them the right information and give them, you know, a little bit of inspiration that you have their back and you're ready to do what it takes to support whatever they need to do. There wasn't a lot of that. And that was mentioned in our survey. So a good thing to do if you're a leader in an organization, if you're under this type of disaster scenario. The battalion chiefs in our department were praised in some ways, but in some ways there are also some negatives on the survey about this. We had only one of our many battalion chiefs implement what I would consider a de facto method of control. They basically implemented a area command. And so rather than the dispatching going into the units looking on the screen where it's very hard to prioritize the calls, what this individual did, they set up area command. So the dispatching went to them. They were on a whiteboard with a helper, and and they kind of prioritize the calls and the dispatch from the battalion chief office. I've done this personally on some really wide area flooding calls, and it works very well. And I think the best thing, one of the biggest things we could have done a little better was organize that more formally across the city. In my opinion, the battalion chiefs each should have set up an area command in their district. You could have maybe fashioned a little bit geographically, but at least within the district as a start. I would have tried to get them 1 or 2 helpers. Even civilians helpers would have been good to manage the call loads and keep the whiteboard up to date. But this battalion chief had tremendous amount of success in a very difficult area of the city running the system. And when you look at our NIMS, our National Incident Management System, this is what's recommended also when systems become overwhelmed. I see a question. I'm going to see if I can find it here. Oh, yes. Someone's asking a question. They get a copy of the presentation afterwards. I'd be happy to send that along with the AAR report if you email me, and that information is going to be available at the end of the presentation. So some crews, we are a very policy-driven department, and some of our younger officers are afraid to step away from policy, and some of our more experienced officers have no problem with it at all when the situation is right. I think this is another thing I'd recommend management to do is really communicate and advocate and support the rank and file when it comes to innovations in this sort of problem. Some crews were taking the calls sequentially because they didn't think they could go out of order. That's normally how we do it under normal system demands. And the better crews were trying, to the extent they could, prioritize what calls were most important. You know, my youngest son has been on the job for about a year here down in Austin, and his officer was taking the calls sequentially. And at 1 a.m, they ran on a fire call in a water closet. And the citizen said, I turned that call in at 4 p.m. today, like, 7 or 8 hours earlier. That's how bad some of our responses were. And when you encourage, I think, the rank and file to make those on-the-spot decisions, and basically giving them permission, I think that'd be a very valuable thing to do from management. Again, this is the time we need good administration. It's really when you need great leadership too, I think. And I'm not saying they didn't do any of that. I'm just saying it could have been done a little bit more frequently. Brush trucks and squads were used. Every apparatus we had that had 4-wheel drive was staffed, and that did take some of the load off of our fire engines and ladder companies as we're making fires. We had we say our call volume was 16 times higher. Our fire volume was at least that much. We probably ran 10 to 15 legitimate fires a day for the 2 days when the storm hit. Power was lost, and people were heating their homes any way they could, essentially. I mean, like in my house, like I told you, I had one room at 43 degrees because I had that heater. I had cat bowls in the other rooms of my house freezing over. I mean, the rest of my house was at 7 degrees, and there's nothing I could do to bring it up any higher. So it was really pretty critical for a lot of people who aren't used to this sort of weather. Dispatch did a great job in that they tried to prioritize the calls to the extent they could on the moment, and they managed a lot of call, but there was also some negative feedback on dispatch in terms of planning. I think this would have been a great pinch point for a upper level manager to realize that dispatch can't do the prioritization. It really needs to be done more in the field, like with the area command, like we talked about earlier. So they were trying harder to do something to make things better, but they weren't maybe doing the best things they could have. So there were some very positives expressed on dispatching, then there were some negatives. Another negative was they could have split. We have a river running down the middle of Austin, the Colorado River, and we could split our dispatching system north and south. That would alleviate a lot of problems. We can use tactical channels where the captains could help the chiefs in an area command dispatching scenario kind of more locally. And none of that stuff was really implemented, which all would have helped. We have a recon system where, based on the number of units that are currently active, we change our response levels. And we've been running this recon system for years. And although it's not perfect, it really was helpful to try to make those decisions. We have trigger points set in our policy. So we were able to say, you know, when you're at 25%, you do X. When you're at 35% units out, you do Y. And because that was done in advance as kind of a pre-plan, that was extremely helpful. And that was some of the feedback we got from the field. And I think a really important thing we got back was everybody did stay safe, which was great. We didn't have any major firefighter injuries. We had quite a few wrecks of our own apparatus because, quite frankly, people are not very good at driving this sort of weather down here. But everybody stayed safe. And so what areas could we improve upon? And one of the areas was preparedness. This is an overall theme. Our station generators were many times not working. We found out that our generators are not hooked up to our heating and cooling systems in some stations. Some of the generators started and just stopped, and some of the generators never started at all. So, you know, we're supposed to be an emergency service organization, and some of our stations weren't hardened enough where the generators even operated correctly. So this was a big problem. And we've done a complete inventory of that now. We're looking for grant money and other funds to get that corrected. But that was unacceptable, and that's something we could have done better on. Because of COVID already shutting down a lot of area businesses, food and water, even for the firefighters, was hard to come by. And there were sometimes they couldn't find food and water, you know. So they were calling around the EOC and other fire stations, or other fire stations where maybe citizen groups or somebody else, or they found a source for food and water, would bring stuff by. They were sharing among each other and making it work. And then, of course, the fire apparatus were an issue because the biodiesel was freezing up, our pumps were freezing up. And again, we weren't getting a lot of direction from above on how to deal with those issues. Everybody had to kind of figure it out in the field, and then share that information amongst each other, and it was fine. But again, I think it wasn't ideal. And you know, we work in suboptimal situations a lot in the fire service, and we accept that. But there's really some things to learn from our event that we've learned that we will certainly do better next time. Working on that now. Communications. In two critical areas, dispatch communication, chain of command communications, were issues. Hold on just a second. Dispatching communications, there were things that were occurring, like there were so many calls, the station speakers were staying open all the time. So firefighters that might get a chance to get some rest could not. It was very stressful having basically the station speakers open the entire time while they're dispatching. And chain of command communications were some of the things like I was talking about earlier. There needed to be some communication, even inspirational messaging about, you know, from the chief saying, you know, we're going to support you. Tell us what you need. You know, we know this is suboptimal. You're authorized to make decisions in the field. We can talk about justifying those later, but we need you guys to do what you need to do. Report to your chiefs, but do what you need to do. Let us know what you need and we'll take care of it. That sort of thing really didn't occur. And it was very evident in the surveys that the firefighters felt a little unsupported from the top. And I think, and I'm not saying that to be critical, I'm just saying how important that was to them. And I would say that in the future, if future leaders like yourselves are in a situation like this, I'm sure many of you will be, don't forget the rank and file really need to hear from their fire chief or their emergency service coordinator on what the expectations are. And I just think hearing that word is from the person on top is extremely important. And we saw that articulated in the surveys very strongly. We did not have an all-call ever put out on resource staffing. And so, we, like most departments, probably have overtime issues that always are challenging our budget. And it appeared that maybe management was underestimating what occurred and maybe didn't call in people as many as they should have early on, concerned with budget implications. And I think if we had done an all call earlier on and got more people at work quicker, when the storm was starting to really develop, we wouldn't have had people working over 100 hours. We could have staffed even more vehicles, but people were literally stranded at their homes away from the fire station, couldn't get in. So I think a little foresight in that area would have been good. Of course, it's easy to say in hindsight, but that's what we're doing. We're looking in hindsight. That would have been a better way to go. The biggest problem with response was we started taking on low priority calls from EMS when they dropped their calls. And again, it would have been appropriate for management they were hearing from the rank and file. They just weren't making the changes. And this is where we really need, this is where management really earns their money. They need to step up and make those tough calls. We can't make it to non-emergency calls, lift assist and stuff right now, unless there's something else attached to that lift assist that's life-threatening. We literally have to get people to warming shelters. We got to make it these fires. We're trying to get people they're stranded outside their homes to warmth. I mean, there were many, like I said, everybody that called the union hall for help tried to call 911 first and couldn't get through. That's how taxed the system was. And then public information. I mean, it was interesting. I'm going to talk about this later, but some of the people that called me personally, I was giving them advice because I didn't have the bandwidth to help them. And I remember one lady, and this could have been done some of this could have been done through public information. I had a lady call me and said she thought the pipes were going to break next door. She turned off the pipes to her house, but the people weren't there. And I said, I'm sorry. I kept telling her, maybe I can get out there and help you, but I know the firefighters can't. They're too busy right now. And then she called me the next day and she goes, the pipes have broken. It's leaking into my apartment. So I said, do you know where the valves are? She goes, yeah, but they're all frozen. And I said, well, you have heat? Do you have power? And she said, yes. So I said, can you boil some water and take it out those valves and pour it over there and then get the tools used before and see if you can shut off the valve. And so it was kind of interesting. She was an elderly woman and she got some of her friends in the neighborhood and they did that. And they were so excited because they were able to literally help themselves, and this sort of public information that could have been helpful with just some really pragmatic tips like that, or how to stay warm, or try to find somebody that does have heat, a family, a relative, or someone will tolerate you and get to there. None of this stuff was really going out in our area. It was almost like, the city at the high echelon didn't quite know what to say. And so citizens were just starving for good information. We noticed that some of the smaller fire services around Austin, what we call ESDs or emergency services, did an outstanding job of this. And for whatever reason, Austin didn't appear to. So again, I'm not trying to be critical, but I think we need to look at this with a very wide-eyed and be objective about what we could have done better. And so that kind of ends the fire department operation part. I'm going to move into the volunteer. I'm going to pause for questions if there's any questions before I move on.
I'll have one for you.
Go ahead, Trevor.
One of the questions that I have is that I get it that you had issues in Austin, but your surrounding communities, were they calling to you guys for help? Because obviously they're having the same problems too. What was the tax on that?
Yeah, and some of the people that called me were from surrounding areas. Austin's about 1 million, but our Metroplex area is probably 2 million. And like, I remember the first story I told you about, the two people in their 70s had the water running on them. I called the county commissioner and I asked if he could get a constable to go out and get them, and he did. So that was great, And so I try to leverage resources like that, but absolutely, you're going to see a story later where we saved a 97-year-old woman from her home. She hadn't had heat, food, or water for 3 days. Her cell phone had died. And she was just outside the city of Austin, but none of that really mattered to us at that point. We were trying to take any call we could and affect it positively. But absolutely, there was a lot of demand from not just the Austin area, but outside the Austin area also. Does that answer your question, Trevor?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot.
Yep. So you kind of got the idea from what I've talked about, but I want to talk about the volunteer efforts, because I think they were very interesting. We had the home rescue operations that I kind of talked about in a little bit of detail. Then we set up a warming shelter. And at one point we lost power, so we had to shut it down, and then we got power back, we reopened it. But the city was so taxed that any warming shelters that we could set up were valuable. And you know, it's kind of interesting because even city council, we have 10 city council members, including the mayor, they were not getting satisfied by the EOC. So they were calling the city manager saying, hey, we have constituents calling us for this or that. And they couldn't get help. And so all the council members started calling me too. And that's what started our water operations. We realized that there was a need for water. So we started our water operations, firefighters volunteering, and we got 5-gallon buckets in pickup trucks. And then we gravitated towards these 250-gallon totes. And finally, we gravitated to a water delivery system that was hooking up basically a spigot to a hydrant. And I'll show you that later, but it all was very organic. You know, I would get these calls, we would try to do what we can, and it ended up, it's morphed into a 400,000 gallons of water being delivered over a 30-day period. So it's very interesting. Let me move on. So the volunteer home rescue operations, you know, it's funny because I had a student reporter from University of Texas call me, and she goes, well, it's probably a lot of people that are socioeconomically disadvantaged or minorities having the problems. And I said, you know, it's really interesting, but that certainly was true. But in some ways, this was a great equalizer. When everybody, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, doesn't have heat in their homes or water or food, everybody kind of gets in the same situation. But there were some differences. The elderly were particularly harmed in this. But there's some interesting people with mental challenges that had problems. I had this guy that called me, and I put him as a lower priority, and I shouldn't have. He called me, he said he was 25 and he's in an apartment by himself, and he didn't have any heat or food or water, but he was 25. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I'll get to you as soon as I can, but I need to deal with some of these folks that are have more severe problems. And he kept calling me back, and nobody else was. Everybody else was really good about being patient. He kept calling me back. So after 24 hours, I finally got to the point where I could get this fella. And so I had a firefighter grab him and bring him to our warming shelter, the Union Hall that just opened up. So just me and him there. And I was dispatching people in my office. And this poor fella, he was a big guy, and he was severely mentally challenged. He probably had the mentality of a 5-year-old. And the poor guy could not take care of himself. He was freezing in his home. I didn't prioritize him high enough. He didn't end up with any damage, but this is how sad it was. I mean, I was in my office, and he pulled the cot where he could see me in my office. And because he wanted to have some sort of human contact, and he would say, Chief Bob, I'm kind of cold. And I said, okay. So I throw what I was doing down and grab a blanket and tuck him in. I mean, this guy was huge. He probably weighed 350 pounds, but he had the mentality of a 5-year-old. And he was all happy. He ended up staying in our shelter for about 10 days. But that was the kind of stuff I was learning about as I went through this. There was a lady that called me, and she said her daughter is in a very hard place to access because of the snow and ice. And she'd run out of all of her psychotic medications. She was destabilizing, and her phone has died, and there's no way they could get to her. So I had a retired firefighter call me, and she went and picked up the mother, took her up to the where this person who was mentally destabilizing lived. She was doing very poorly. And they had, she was very paranoid. She was offered medications. They took several hours to try to get her to take the medications, coach her through it, stabilize her, and finally get her away from her house back to a warm place where she could get food and medicine and care. And so there's all these different things that occurred that many people may not think about. I was going home at 10 at night and I had a council member call me, and they said that there was a quadriplegic who was been at 48 hours in the waiting room at the hospital, already released, but no way to get back to her. Actually, she had a hotel because, which was only 6 blocks away. And so, you know, I called a few firefighters and we got a van, and 4 of us went down there because her rig was her wheelchair was very heavy. And we were able to grab her and get her to her apartment or get her to that hotel. But she had literally sat, she's supposed to have 24-hour care, and she'd sat there in the waiting room at the hospital for over 48 hours with nobody to take her to really 6 blocks away. That's how challenged the system was. And then she called me the next day, and she had a friend at the warming shelter that had been turned in 2 days. So we went and picked him up too and brought that person to her hotel room. And we actually went and got her 24-hour care person, brought that person to the hotel room. So the reason I'm talking about all this, there's lots of things I never thought of as possibilities as far as challenge that occurred when you get 400 people calling you in 2 days. Information challenged. I had maybe public's afraid to do this, but I wasn't. So I had a lady call me and she said, listen, my friend fell down and broke their arm and maybe broke their hip, but I can't get through to 911. I can't get anybody to help me. And so I said, well, how old are you? And they said, well, we're 30 years old. I said, what kind of car do you have? Well, I have a Subaru Outback 4-wheel drive. I said, that's like the perfect car. I said, have you ever driven in snow and ice? No. I said, well, so I gave her a little class on how to do it. She had to drive 4 miles to get this person, and then about another 2 to take them to the hospital. 2.5 hours later, she calls me and said the person did have a broken arm, the hip was just bruised, and she was able to take the person to the hospital and get care. So that was a case where I couldn't do it myself. I didn't have the bandwidth, and that was considered low priority from the type of things I was dealing with, but I was able to coach the citizens to do it. So, you know, we wouldn't want to do that in normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. And these folks were willing to take a little more risk to help their neighbors. And I think with the right information, they were informed enough to do so. This is a quick little video I'm going to play that kind of gives an idea. This shows a little bit of our water operation. Again, we started this with buckets of 5-gallon buckets, ended up delivering close to 400,000 gallons of water. And what we found is because the city water system went down, I don't know if it's the same way in Canada, but there's a lot of little brew pubs down here. And I talked to the mayor about prioritizing getting water back to them, even if it wasn't, you know, perfectly sanitary water. And what these brew pubs are doing for us is they were boiling water and putting it in totes for us so we could pick them up and take them to apartment complexes, people around town. And literally I would get to some of these places, or my volunteers would at 9, 10 at night on a Saturday night, and there were little kids. It was sad. There were little kids, bringing out pots and pans just to get water so they could flush their toilets or bathe themselves or drink. It was really a great need. But this little video here captures some of that. You can see some of the water operations. And before I start, we're almost at the 1 hour mark. Is it okay if I go a little bit longer, or do we need to have a hard stop at noon?
I think we're okay, Bob. I know people will have to drop off for other commitments, but please carry on.
Okay, well, I'll play this video and then I'll answer questions, and I have a few other things I could show if people don't have any questions. But let me start here. And then, sorry, I took a little bit longer, and please stay on if you can.
gone from saving people to housing people in need to delivering water all throughout the entire city.
Several groups like the Austin Firefighters Association, United Professional Organizers, and civilian volunteers are banding together to distribute what they call the largest volunteer water distribution project in the city.
They come in, we route them, we stop them here, we get their information, we talk to them about the weight limits on their truck, and then they come over here where we load up an empty cube. The firefighters are going to fill this up, and then the guy in the truck is going to drive somewhere where people need water. We're on our way with United.
An ops team is nearby running logistics, mapping out who needs water and where.
It's 275 gallon per cube.
The water map has got very green where there's potable water across the city. However, many apartment complexes, especially in low-income neighborhoods, are without water and still without water, and they will be for some time.
While the city has restored water to most counties, some apartment properties are opting to leave the water off to avoid further damage to units caused by busted pipes.
They don't know when the water don't be turned on because they don't have enough plumbers to work on the water break here.
So I see a question. Let me see if I can answer it. You may go along. I'll may go along. Okay. And that's basically the video. It just kind of captures some of the mood. And you know, it's interesting because we were doing all these deliveries with volunteers. And if anybody that's worked with volunteers before, you know that it's easy to get volunteers at the beginning and a little bit harder as time goes on, right? So I called the EOC and I said, listen, we need firefighters or maybe sanitation workers or anybody that can drive a four-wheel drive truck that could take these totes around Austin. So we had a major operation set up. And the EOC, actually, one of the chiefs in my department, the chief of staff said, Bob, I've got a solution for you. We're going to do it for you. And I said, Chief, you have not delivered one drop of water yet. We've got an entire operation set up. I've got 40 orders in my hand right now. How are you going to satisfy these orders? They go, well, we have a system. You put in the request. I said, Chief, that won't work. You know, you can't do these 40 orders that I have in my hands today. You know, you can't do that. Can you augment our efforts? And I guess I attribute that to lack of situational awareness. He was trying to work a system where you put in requests to the EOC and they satisfy them the way they would normally satisfy them. But what we needed him to help augment our system because we had the system up and running very well. It was very efficient. We just needed more people. And it took a little while to get people to understand that, a couple calls to council, but after that, they did. And the city kind of broke out of their normal mode of doing things and fit in better with the volunteer groups to augment their efforts. And I think that's a good lesson learned too. It's so easy for us to get kind of rigid in our thinking. And when these situations become extremely suboptimal, that's when we need to be quite a bit more innovative and cooperative. So I told you we eventually set up hydrant systems. So when the system when the grid became safe again, the water grid, these apartment complexes still had problems. So we got a bunch of these. This is a 2.5-inch adapter goes to our hydrant. This is a hose thread here. And then we created these buckets, and the water department wanted to make sure we had an air gap system. So we built about 50 of these buckets where we could hook up to the hydrant and a citizen could come up, turn on the spigot and get water out. It's air gap because they put a bucket here and the water would drop down. So the bacteria supposedly cannot, although I think that's a very low risk anyway, could not come up this way. So we had about 50 of these deployed around the city in addition to our totes that we had deployed around the city. At a bunch of apartment complexes. And this effort continued on for just shortly less than a month until all the different apartment complexes were up and running again properly. And I don't think we have time to play this video, but it is actually an interview with the 97-year-old woman we saved. And it was quite amazing. She didn't even know she knew there were firefighters could identify themselves, but she basically she called the people that came as a firefighter's girlfriend, a firefighter off duty, her angels. I mean, she said, I didn't even ask them where we're going. She goes, I just trust them. They led me out to the car and I just trusted they would get me to the right spot. So it was really an amazing time for all of us. It was very difficult and stressful, but quite amazing, the interactions that we had with the public. And so I'm gonna read this. So I'm looking at Bob, great presentation. Does Austin have an incident management system? Is the whole fire department trained? Yes, we do. We're all trained in NIMS, which is a National Incident Management System. I think we do an extremely very good job on fires and floods and other things. I just think that there was a lack of situational awareness between what was going on in the EOC, what was happening in the field, and that created some inefficiencies. And I'm not saying that the system was wholesale broken. I think we did a lot of good stuff. I think there were some things that if management could have done a little differently, and this is all in hindsight, of course, would have made the operation a lot more effective. And a lot of the lessons learned that you can access will be in the report I can send you. If you email your request to this email address here, I'll be happy to send you the presentation and the AAR we did. And I am going to end here and answer any questions anybody might have. Looks like we might have one more here. Oh, just email me. And if there are no questions, that's fine. Be happy to, my cell phone number's here also. If anybody wanted more details about the water operation or any aspect of this incident, I'd be happy to visit with you. Again, you email me your stuff. I'd be happy to send the presentation and our AAR report. I think you'll find it interesting. I see a few more chat items here. Let me see. Oh, the operations center stood up they didn't start until a few days after we had the uptick in incidents. Again, it seemed like management's had a little more lag time than I would expected. Once they were set up, they stayed in place for a couple days after the weather broke. But see, that was also a problem, right? Because after the weather broke, we still had 30 days of water operations. So they broke, the DOC, the Department Operations Center, broke down in about a week, and the EOC lasted about a week after that.
Bob, I'd like to say thank you very much on behalf of the city of Lloydminster, as well as all the attendees for taking the time out of your busy schedule to give this presentation. I'd like to thank the attendees for their listening, great questions and participation. This has just been an excellent presentation, and I'd like to extend an invitation to you if you ever do decide to come north, and when the opportunity arises, we'd love to host you in our city and show you a little Canadian hospitality. But thank you so much for your presentation today.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I would love to do that. And, I've never given a presentation. I've done a lot on Zoom. First time I did a presentation, you almost feel like you're in a black hole because you can't see anybody in front of you. But I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful. And thank everybody for your interest.
Thanks again, Bob. Muchly appreciated for your presentation. Just want to invite everybody back for tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for the next session with presenter Pamela Golden McLeod. So there'll be more information available on that from the city if you've registered regarding that presentation. But thank you all. Have a great day and be safe.